Welcome to the Handchild's Horizon podcast, where we explore learning science and everything you need to be that high-performing student. And my name is Dr. George Handchild. We're going to dive into what it takes to minimize the input effort and maximize the output. In other words, how can you maximize all of that effort that you put into studying? Because we know that everybody out there, not everybody, but a lot of people out there are working really hard. So it's all about getting the maximum results from that effort. So minimize the effort, maximize the output. Today I want to give you the tools, techniques, and strategies for you to be able to create your own study strategy. What does that mean? That doesn't mean you're going to recreate studying altogether. I'm going to map out the framework, give multiple tools, strategies, and techniques that work within that framework. And then it's up to you to utilize these tools, take them maybe one at a time, and institute them into what you're doing already. And that's really the key, because once you find what works for you and try some of these different techniques and strategies, and as they work, add more and subtract stuff that doesn't work, you are going to truly minimize your study effort that you're putting in and maximizing your outcomes. So if you like this kind of material, give me a like and subscribe so we can really knock that algorithm for a loop. So for the sake of clarity, the goal for today is for you to be able to adjust your study techniques and strategies to minimize the input effort and maximize the output. Always remember that learning is an action. If we are doing passive things, like one of the worst ways to study is to reread something. That gives us almost zero output when we reread. How we read, if we read passively, we're going to get a poor output as well. If we use active reading techniques and active learning techniques, we're going to get higher and higher outputs on this end. So always remember that learning is active. Learning is an action. And to help us kind of frame this out from the very beginning, I love the acronym PAPR, P-A-P-R. I've kind of made this up. This is a Dr. George acronym that I made up, and the P is for prepare, A is for acquire, the second P is for practice. There is no E, but R for reflect. So prepare, acquire, practice, reflect. And if you think about how you study and put it within this initial framework, now we're going to start tacking on strategies and tactics. So let's dive in and take a look at some of the critical points for learning. And first, learn in context. Leverage associations, and struggling helps learning. What do we mean by learn in context? Well, if you're trying to study and learn facts that are isolated, so if you're trying to learn isolated facts without the context in it, that is one of the toughest ways to learn things. And it doesn't help that learning stick, because what do we want? We want learning to stick. And the reason why learning in isolation doesn't work is because our brain makes networks. You know what the difference between an expert and a novice is? It's really the content in their mind, the knowledge, those knowledge chunks, but the reality is it's the networks that are associated with those chunks of knowledge, those pieces of content. So experts have many, many networks or many points where that new piece of knowledge is getting connected to other networks. So we're actually kind of holding it in. Think of it like putting strings on it to hold it down. For a large balloon, a new network might be, or a new piece of content might be a large balloon. The more strings you have on it, the better you hold it in, and the better it's going to stick with your mind. So that's why we never learn in isolation. We always learn the facts within the context of what it means, and we leverage associations, because since our brain is already network driven, it loves creating networks, and that's the difference between an expert and a novice. Leverage the networks that you already have. Leverage associations that you're already making. That is one of the critical things, and we're going to, in the prepare stage that's coming up next, we're going to look at specific strategies to be able to do that, and do that quickly and do it well. And then the third thing for a critical point is struggling helps learning. Believe it or not, it's called desirable difficulty, and it was brought to bear by the Bjorks. They came up with desirable difficulty because there does need to be a certain level of difficulty to help that learning stick. Now we are in the prepare stage. So let's prepare. And the first thing that I always think of is my physical space. And there's been a lot of studies about physical space and what you should do, how it should be this, how it should be that. And really, if you think about it, the one thing that you want it to be is trigger you to begin studying. What do? I have a pair of noise canceling headsets that I turn on. That's not the trigger. The trigger is when I turn on YouTube and listen to binaural beats. So there's no talking or singing in the music. It's just the binaural beats. And that triggers me that, hey, I am now going to study. So the same thing, you need to find a trigger for you. Now, you don't want to climb into bed to study, because you're trigger for sleeping when you go into your bedroom. You don't want to sit in the same chair that you always eat in, because that's going to trigger you for, hey, I'm hungry. So you want to find something that triggers you to put you in that space. Marty Lobdell did a great video, and he talked about the University of Hawaii in a study they did where they actually just put a yellow sticky on a lamp and only turned the lamp on when it was time to study. That is a great trigger. So it's all about the triggers, not necessarily the exact space, but it's about the triggers that we create. So like me, I like to be mobile, so I have my headset, my binaural beats, and that triggers me into now I am studying. And that brings us to, how long should I study? Well, that's really simple. If you're going for a huge study session, you're going to study well, then you start declining, and after 45 minutes, you're relatively getting nothing out of it. So that's maximizing our input and minimizing our output, the exact opposite of what we want to do. So what you want to do is you want to begin studying, and you're going through, and after about 20-25 minutes maybe, or you'll probably feel yourself starting to decline. Well, instead of letting yourself decline to zero, take a break. And what do we mean? What do I mean by a break? Well, you don't have to take a 20-minute break if you were studying for 20 minutes. Take 5 minutes and do an activity. Do some air squats, push-ups, burpees, watch an anime, a little bit of an anime. Do something to recharge, and then after that 5 minutes, or when you're recharged, come back and you're starting back up top. So I studied 20 minutes, took a 5-minute break to do some push-ups and some air squats, maybe get some water, whatever it may be, and then I'm starting again. I'm starting back up at the top. So as I'm at the top, then I start dropping a second time, another 20-25 minutes. I'm going to take that break as well. And then I'm continually at my peak. So that's how I minimize input, maximize output, stay at that peak. Now for the main piece of the preparation stage, we're going to set a goal, predict, and connect. The predictions and connections we kind of mash together, but they're so important that I wanted to make sure that we separated them out in this preparation phase. The first thing that we need to do is set a goal. So what is your goal for studying? Is it to get through 30 pages of this textbook? Is it to understand something in a certain way? Define your goal. I want to get through these 30 pages of reading that I have to do, get them to stick and be able to pass a test. That's a goal, right? So define what that is for you. It has to fit the need that you have at the moment. And this really comes from Anders Ericsson. Anders Ericsson came up with deliberate practice. Did you know that experts always have a goal for their practicing? So let's say a chess expert, violinist, anybody in any of the cognitive studying, experts have a goal. And did you know when they practice or study, it is stressful. It is not a fun activity, because they are constantly moving towards that goal and testing themselves to get better, getting feedback from themselves, getting feedback from others. So it is a stressful time. That's the difference between a master and a novice. A novice may actually enjoy practice and have fun practicing, where a master of something, or someone moving towards mastery, they set a goal, and practice or studying is actually stressful. Now, it doesn't mean stressful in a bad way. It just means there is more stress. It's not a just, hey, this is fantastic, I'm having a lot of fun kind of thing. It means that I have a goal, and I'm very focused on attaining that, and along with that focus, I am very purposeful. So think of it as purposeful practice when we study. Set a goal, make it meaningful for you. Now that we've set a goal to really get our mind ready and open is for us to predict. There's been a lot of research in this area. Some of the researchers are Elizabeth Loftus, Anders Ericsson, who we just discussed with our goal setting. He is also someone who studied prediction in terms of mastery. Then there's Robert Bjork. We've talked about Robert Bjork and how he came up with desirable difficulty. There's also John Sweller and Henry Roediger as well. So prediction is steeped in a lot of evidence-based content, evidence-based material, evidence-based studies. We know that predicting works. Why does it work? Well, it works because it begins opening us up and making us curious. So Sarah Cavanaugh talks about emotion being the spark of learning. Well, learning, to make it stick, we have to create that emotional connection. Well, we don't have to, but it will stick better if we have that emotional connection. What do I mean by emotion? An emotion is curiosity. By us predicting and asking questions, we're becoming curious. That helps the content stick. So how should we predict? Well, let's say you have to read 30 pages of this textbook, or you're going to listen to an hour-long video lecture, take a look at what that lecture is, and then maybe read the abstract or just the title and say, okay, this is what I believe I'm going to learn. And you start classifying, okay, this is what I believe I'm going to learn. And then you just kind of state things that you think you'll learn. Ask yourself, why will I learn this? And how do I think that this will connect to my previous experience? Remember, we talked about your mind being a network and all of those leveraging associations. Well, that's how you begin leveraging that association. You get curious on, how will this connect to my previous experience? How will this connect to something else that I learned within the course? So you really want to just ask yourself those types of questions. And then once you've asked yourself those types of questions, you're ready for the final step in the preparation phase. And that final step is connecting. And guess what? You started doing that when you were predicting. So predicting by asking those questions of how will this connect to my previous experience? How will this connect to this other piece of knowledge that I have? You are becoming curious, creating that spark of learning. And by doing that, you're creating those connections. You're not creating the connection yet. What you're doing is you're opening your mind up to be more willing to layer in those connections within your networks. And remember, the difference between a novice and an expert is the number of connections they have within the network on that one piece of material. So as you're learning it, you are creating literally more connections to your mental networks within your mind. So that's why when we prepare, if we set a goal, predict, and then connect, and we could do all of this in less than 5 minutes, right? It's not like it's a great big lengthy thing. It can be done in less than 5 minutes. And we are now ready to start learning and ready to start encoding content so it will stick and stay with us. Now we're moving on to the acquire or acquisition stage. I like to call it acquire because it is an action. And remember, learning is an action, and it has 3 basic parts: encode, store, retrieve. So let's dive in and learn some techniques and strategies to help us encode, store, and retrieve, because that's the way our mind is going to process this. And really, the retrieval piece, once we get into the practice, the next P is where we're really going to put in some strategies that help us get that knowledge back out, because the key is our ease of retrieval in order for us to really be able to use knowledge in new and unique ways and creative ways to solve complex issues. Now, when we're encoding, we don't encode separately. When we encode, we're also working on the storage and the retrieval. So it is really important to make the storage as clean and tidy as possible, because think of it like a toolbox. Here's a couple pictures of some drawers in my toolbox. Each tool has a specific place. The metric goes with the metric, standard goes with the standard, screwdrivers, ratchets, whatever it may be. These are all separate and they each have a place within a specific drawer in the toolbox. Now that helps me be able to select tools much quicker. Well, think about your mind. If you just have a bunch of tools and strategies lumped in, or all this content just kind of thrown together in a magic box, it's going to take a while just to find it. And so we don't want that. We want to be able to retrieve it and use it really well. We don't want to use our energy in that way. We want to be able to just, oh, yeah, okay, that's in the second drawer. Here it is. Here's this piece. This is what I need. And when things are set up that way in your mind, you're able to use them creatively because you're not using much energy in the retrieval process. So let's chat about some people who've had some big influence in this realm. And I'm going to read these off to you. Fergus Craik and Robert Lockhart. So they're renowned for developing the levels of processing framework, which suggests that memory's retention depends on the depth of processing. That's why we're encoding. That's why we're going to do some of these techniques that I'm going to show you here in a moment. And their work emphasized deeper, more meaningful processing of information leads to better encoding and longer lasting memory. What that means is there's this thing called Bloom's taxonomy that many educators use, and think of it like levels of learning. The bottom level is your retention, things like that. And then your top levels are synthesis, where you're putting ideas together and you're just learning at a much higher level. We're going to start right up top because when we start at the top, it presupposes that everything in the bottom will fill in. So that's kind of how we're going to go with our techniques. And then there's Alan Baddeley and Graham Hitch, and these authors, they're known for their work on the model of the working memory, which has had a significant impact on the information, how information is encoded because it's so short. Henry Rodiger and Jeff Karpke, known for their research in the testing effect. So we're going to use testing quite a bit because testing, believe it or not, helps us encode as well. But it's not if we just test the recall of a fact. Remember, we said it has to be contextual. So we're going to create that testing within the context. So we're going to go to that higher level of Bloom's taxonomy and not just shoot for that recall within the testing. So that is a hugely important piece because a lot of these strategies, if you use them at this lower level, it's not really going to help you minimize your effort, maximize your output. It's going to maximize your input and minimize your output. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that, that we're using these in the correct way. So let's jump in and look at some ways where we can begin encoding so we have maximum or minimum effort, maximum output right now. Now we're in the encoding piece. So we're going to encode, store, and retrieve. And this is how to do all of those really at one time. So let's say you have that 30-page block of textbook that you have to read, or a 60-minute lecture, whatever it may be, coming from your professor. The first step, create your own micro-learning. Remember, we learned that working memory is short. So read a couple paragraphs, listen to a minute of the lecture, and then ask yourself specific questions. Test yourself from that micro learning that you just had. So you created your own micro learning by cutting it up. Now you're going to test yourself. And the key is, don't just test yourself basic recall. You can ask maybe a couple recall questions, but ask yourself, okay, what was this content and how does it connect to what I've previously learned? So we're already creating those connections. So that's a big piece of the storage and retrieval. If I start connecting it with what I've already learned or past experience, then it's easier to connect. It means I'm storing it very well. And when you start asking yourself questions, you're becoming curious, keep creating a greater spark of learning. So that is what we want. Curiosity is the spark of learning. Or actually, Sarah Cavanaugh says, emotion is a spark of learning, and curiosity is an emotion that can help you spark that, and it'll help you spark very well. Also, another strategy that you can use, I love the testing strategy. You have to go at a high level and ensure that it connects with things, your past experience, but also self-explaining. That is a fantastic tool. So explain what you just read in your own terms. So make it something, and make it something that you use your words so you understand it really well. When you're able to explain something in your own terms, you are really beginning to understand it. And when you have that high level of understanding, you can retrieve it better because you're storing it very well. And as you're self-explaining, call out any new content. Purposely call out new content. Hey, this is new. So self-explain and then test. The way that I personally do it, I'll make the micro learning, and then I will self-explain. And then if I don't get it real well, I'll revise. So self-explain and revise, then create a test. That only takes a matter of a minute to do that. So you're not really slowing yourself down. Now consider this, if you have to read this 30 pages and you just read it passively, you're not going to retain much. If you go back and read it again, you're not going to retain any more. Rereading does not work. But if you go through it actively, you are going to be better. By the time you're done, you are going to have this content locked in. So you're going to read this content, turn into micro-learning as you go, test yourself, and self-explain. My process, micro-learning, self-explain, test. That's how I like to go about encoding. Are there other strategies? Absolutely. But right now I just want to give you some techniques and strategies so you can begin implementing and see which ones work, because we could talk all night about encoding. So let's just stick with these for now. And that will help you with the storage as well. Because when we store things well through these encoding processes, and remember what helps us with storing, how we create those connections. So far for the encoding process, we have break it into micro-learning, use self-explain and revise, test yourself. You can also give yourself feedback. So the feedback you get, oh, I tested myself and I got this wrong. Why did I get it wrong? And then explain things in your own terms. You can also teach someone else, and that someone else can be a coffee pot, your wall in front of you, whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be anything specific. Just teach that content. And all of these techniques, select one or two of them and use them, and they only take a little bit of time to do. And as you have each micro-learning, so I have micro-learning 1, then I'm going to have 2, and I might have up to 200 of them. Who knows? Depends how long the lecture or the textbook is, right? So continue to self-explain, test yourself on all the content that comes before. So if I'm on micro-learning 37, which I could be very quickly, always connect back, and seek places where connections happen. And when we're doing that, we're connecting it in our brain, and that helps in the storage and retrieval. So the teaching, self-explaining, feedback, all of that is amazing. And then when you add in that, it's not really interleaving. We're going to get into interleaving momentarily because that's huge with the practice piece. But it's a form, I'll call it a pseudo interleave, if you will. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're not just learning things in isolation, which it may have sounded like when I first said make your own micro-learning, because we're bringing along everything that we learned prior to. So when you explain, you're explaining the piece you just did, and you could talk about how it connects to what you previously did as well, what you previously learned. And that is so helpful in that encoding process, because that's going to help you store and then retrieve that information even faster, so you can utilize it in creative and new ways to solve complex issues. And because my dissertation and first APA article was on visualization and self-talk, so mental imagery and self-talk, it was in the arena of sports and performance, I would be misinformed if I didn't bring up visualization or mental imagery actually helps as well. So create your micro-learning and then physically create a video within your own head of the content, whatever it may be. Get creative, because you are the producer, director of your own movie that happens in your mind. So feel free to use visualization to help you with that as well. So we've prepared, we've acquired, now we're going to practice. All right, now we are in the practice stage. This is my most favorite stage. This is the favorite stage for me because we're going to take our strategies from the acquire stage, bring them over to the practice stage. And that was, what did we do? We did teaching, self-explaining, self-explain and revise, micro-learning, testing, and visualization. There's other techniques. Those are basic 6, if you will. And we're bringing them into the practice stage. Now, in the practice phase, we are going to add in feedback, interleaving, which is hugely helpful, and space repetition. Space repetition, if you interleave well, space repetition takes care of itself. So space repetition does not mean I'm using flashcards. I am not an advocate of flashcards because that has us learning content in isolation, where we want to learn content within the context that it's being used, because that helps us create associations and use it in creative ways to solve complex issues. Let's start with feedback. Feedback is an incredibly important tool. Anders Ericsson utilized feedback with his deliberate practice model. And what feedback can do for us in studying is it makes sure that we are doing exactly what we need to do. It makes sure that we are becoming that expert that we are striving to become and learn this material in a way that matters. So how can we give ourselves feedback? What if it's just us teaching? I don't have a study partner. If you have a study partner, that is a great way to go get feedback from them directly. And how would you even do that? Well, start with testing or quizzing yourself. Now, ask yourself questions that are at that higher level of learning, that synthesis level. I'll have another video coming out on how to create questions and such, where you can test yourself at those high levels. It's pretty straightforward on how to do that. You probably do that to a certain extent already. But ask yourself a question, answer, and then give yourself feedback. And you can look at your text, review any part of a lecture or video that you may need to give yourself that feedback. Say, oh, I got this correct. This, I got it correct, but I really didn't get all the context around it. So be very nitpicky with yourself, and that will help you give yourself feedback so everything sticks. And if you're working with a study partner, have them looking up and ensuring that you're getting everything correct with those connections. And maybe they don't even know those connections themselves. So by you going through that testing exercise with those high-level questions, synthesis level questions, it's going to help them learn as well. So as you're testing, if you have a partner, not only are they helping you, but you're helping them at the same time. So that's one way of getting feedback right away. Use the testing. Or even you can do that with self-explaining too. Explain something, say, you know what, I didn't really use my own words with this. I was too busy trying to memorize something else or anything like that. So use self-explaining, then give yourself feedback on how you explained it. So explain the concept, look at the concept, see where you fell short. It's that simple to get feedback. Now, interleaving. I love interleaving. So we just went through and acquired a bunch of new content through this 30 pages of textbook that we had to read. Let's just use that as an example. So instead of just practicing that in isolation or doing mass practice on that content, we're going to interleave. So we're going to bring in content from the week prior, 2 weeks prior to that, and test ourselves, use whatever technique, self-explaining. Connecting is a great one for interleaving, because you connect how the content you learned today connects with the content last week, 2 weeks ago, or if it doesn't connect, because not always does it connect, right? So that gives us the opportunity to self-explain, make connections, or clearly state that there is no connection with it. That is okay as well. And if you're using testing, test yourself on the content from a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, however far long ago it is. So you're continually rotating back to it. That gives us a good level of desirable difficulty, and that helps the content stick. Because when it comes to performance, that interleaving consistently outperforms mass practice, except for cramming. But I do not advocate cramming. Cramming does not have that content stick. You lose 60 to 80% of whatever content you study the very next day if you cram. So this strategy actually helps you have that content stick and not have to cram. That is a great big deal. Now, if you interleave, so if you're going back and taking week 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many weeks back and bringing it in, that is going to give you spaced repetition. There's been a lot of studies on spaced repetition for isolated facts and using flashcards and such. But remember, we want to go at that higher synthesis style level. So the higher level of learning, not the recall level down here within Bloom's taxonomy. So we just want to reach back into those weeks consistently. We don't want to get hung up on, well, I should wait 1.3 days or 1.2 weeks in order to do this. Don't get hung up with that. Go back and grab content from those previous weeks and bring them in and interleave them with what you're learning here. And then that brings us to reflect, the reflect stage. This is a great stage as well. So take time to pause when you're done with your acquisition and practice stages. Take a moment to pause. It only takes a few minutes, 5 minutes or less, to reflect on what you just did. What did I do well? How did this go? Ask yourself questions and give yourself honest responses to how the study session went. And remember, that study session could be an hour, but remember, we're going to take breaks throughout. So if I'm coming along, doing great, then I'm starting to dive. Then I'm going to take a break. Do some burpees, do some air squats, do whatever you need to do to get back in the game. Then come back in for another 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And then when you feel yourself starting to peak down, take a break. When you're done with all of those in the acquire and practice stages, reflect. Okay, so part of my reflection is going to be how long were my basic study sessions that went, so the individual ones before I needed a break, because breaks are great. Don't think you need to go 4 hours without a break. That would be ridiculous. Breaks are very helpful for our mental aptitude. And then what went well in the study session? What did not go well? And is there something that I am currently stuck on or did not get from this session that I need? So reflect. Reflect. Now, if you just take one thing away from this process in the beginning, use the prediction. Predict, because the prediction really opens everything up for those networks to be formed. And when those networks are formed, it's going to help it stick. So use that prediction. If you don't use anything else, or you just want to start with one thing, use prediction. So I hope this was helpful. Tell me in the comments if you'd like to hear of anything specific or what I can do better in terms of how to help you study.